7:01. Amber, could you do a roll call, please? Sure. On the agenda, but I'm sure you do.
Lee Warren.
Here.
Mike Morgan.
Here.
Steve Reinhardt.
Here.
Bruce Carpenter. Brian Carroll.
Here.
Sean Emmerich.
Here.
Dave Motley.
Here.
Keisha Moulton. I think she's online.
Yeah, she's muted.
Okay. Rhonda Lynn Riley.
Here.
Okay, I think we got everybody except Bruce.
All right. Discussion possible action to excuse any committee member absence, if any. Do we know why Bruce?
I remember I told you he was going through a procedure, so he's I didn't know if he was going to be able to call in or not. So obviously he wasn't able to call in because
Okay,
of it,
so it's a medical situation.
Yeah.
Entertain a motion to excuse Bruce's absence.
I make a motion.
Motion by Steve, seconded. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that is done. Housekeeping.
I will do that. Fill in for Vanessa this morning. I think we're probably used to all of this, but if you are on screen and a committee member, if you can keep your camera on so that we can see you as well as the commissioner liaisons, and then stay muted unless you're speaking, of course. There is the raise hand function if you want to speak. And then I think the last little bit is that camera, or not camera, that microphone is good. You don't have to speak up or anything, but it does pick up side conversation. So just be aware of that.
And Vanessa noted at the last meeting I was at that evidently a new point in Teams is it will number the hand raises. So you can see an order of who raised their hand first. So
What it used to do is it just put them on the top.
yeah, but now it'll show 1, 2, 3, 4.
That's nice.
Perfect. Or, yeah, I open up Teams just so somebody does raise their hand, I can typically see it. So, okay. Yes.
Just a quick reminder that we have a sign-in roster right over here. My team member, team lead Denise, is monitoring for us. So if you're here and you are seeking CE credit, please make sure that you sign in.
Okay. Also, if you're a guest and want to speak on an agenda item or not, or agenda item, there is a form out there to fill out. If you could please do that. All right. Moving forward, remarks from the chair. So great to have our final meeting of the year, plugging right along. I did want to welcome our newest member who's taking over for Scott Regan's position, which is Rhonda Lynn Riley. Thank you so much. Thank you for filling in that spot. We went through a process recently and to select the committee members for this replacement and for all the ones coming up next year. I can tell you from 4 years ago to now, that process has definitely gone through a number of transitions, and it's getting better each time, and that's great. I think it's fantastic. We've had the number of applicants that we've had to come in and want to be a part of this. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad, but I'm trying to see this actually as a good thing, as opposed to fighting to find people who want to be involved. So I think this is a great thing. I did want to take a quick second, and we have two inspector committee members that will be starting in January. If they could stand up and introduce themselves to everybody that's here, that'd be great.
Hi, I'm Randy Bayer, inspector member, own my own inspection company, Texas Sure Home Inspections, retired custom home builder for over 25 years, past president of the Greater Houston Builders Association, past president of the Texas Association of Builders.
Thanks.
Stephanie Cochran, I'm from the Corpus Christi Coastal Bend area. I have South Coast Inspections. I've been at this a little bit over 8 years and excited to be a part of the committee.
Perfect. Thank you guys for coming. And then I wanted to say to our departing members, we have 4 that are departing. Hawaiian Shirt Steve, Sean Emmerich, who I think is still crying in his coffee this morning a little bit. Go Rangers. Dave Motley and Keisha. I know, especially from the public member, it's tough to volunteer your time, especially on something that you're not completely integrally involved with every single day, like inspector members are. So we greatly appreciate the input from and the time that's invested from our public members. I know we all have lives that we want to do outside of this, and this can end up taking a lot of time. To Sean, thank you so much. The leadership that you've had and being there and always being a good sounding board and always being there involved is greatly, greatly appreciated. Steve, 13 years. We keep trying to loop you in for more, but you know.
Nobody reevaluated rules again.
No, the start time is not December, it's January. It's fine.
I'll do it again.
Absolutely. But the amount that you guys have given for the last.
Hello, this is Bruce.
Yes, Bruce.
Oh, he just joined.
Oh, Bruce joined. So we don't have to see you on Central. Good to see you.
Yeah, I hadn't been out in my office for a while and my computer, I don't know what's wrong with it. Anyway, I'm here.
We're just glad to see you.
Thank you.
But again, just thank you guys for everything that you've done. I know there's a long commitment. Most people don't realize that for the inspector members, it's a 6-year term and not a 2-year term. And that's quite a bit of time. And to do 2 terms plus a year, it is greatly appreciated. So thank you very much. All right. We have on the agenda ratification of the minutes from July 17th, but it's my understanding those aren't necessarily ready yet.
No, they're ready. It's just they're not available on the website. So because the inspector members, we're trying to comply with a piece of legislation where we're dealing with confidentiality. So we took a lot of stuff off in doing that, and the minutes weren't available on the website, if I'm recalling. So the members haven't had a really chance to look at it. So we were going to ask if you could just punt that till next meeting where the committee can have a chance to look at the minutes and make any corrections or vote on.
Okay. Yeah. No, it's fine. We'll do that at our January meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Item 6, general comments from visitors or written comments on non-agenda items. If there's anybody who would like to speak on a non-agenda item, please let yourself be known. Seeing none in the room and
We do have a written comment in the materials.
written comment about the builders. Yeah, the builders issue. You know, it's funny in reading through this. I think every inspector feels the stress of when you're trying to do an inspection on a new home and builders and they start putting up these roadblocks for inspectors and requiring a crazy amount of insurance and other stipulations and waiving your right to go after said builder even if you get injured through their gross negligence and workers' comp and all this other junk. I wish there was a way that we could, as an entity here, do something about that. I don't know if there's anything we can do considering builders aren't regulated in the state of Texas. The closest we got was the TRCC years ago, and that went away. Got sunsetted, in I think 2007, 2007 or 2009. And even that wasn't, didn't regulate the builders. It just had no teeth to it. It sunsetted.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see us have some ability to knock that out. I think what happens is a lot of these builders are using this as a means to prevent their houses from being inspected.
Do you want to give an example what you're talking about if they hadn't read it?
I know there's some of them that require like $2 million of insurance that you name them as an additional insured. You're waiving all rights to go after the builder if you get hurt or die through their gross negligence. You have to give them copies of workers' comp, car insurance. I mean, any number of different things that they're just throwing in there. And what they do is they tell the buyer, oh, it's no problem. You can have a third-party inspection. It's no big deal. Everything's great. And then once that time actually comes, oh, they just need to sign this form, get it right back to us, it'll be perfectly fine. And most inspectors are going to look at that and I'm not waiving my right for all that. I'm not naming you as an additional insured so that you have an open-ended, window to start filing a claim on my insurance on stuff like that. So,
I've got one in our area that is in the contract with the buyer that if they use a third party, that the inspector will not only be TREIC, but a licensed plumber and a licensed electrician.
Yeah, I've seen that where you have to be ICC certified in all the areas. There's some where they say you can never go on the roof at all. You can't pull the cover on the electrical panel or you'll void the warranty. You can't take the cover off the HVAC or you'll void that warranty. I mean, it's getting pretty crazy on some of these builders. They're pushing really hard to prevent their houses from being inspected. Now, the buyer has an option, later on after the house is complete and after they've closed. I typically recommend do a warranty inspection, before the builder's warranty expires. It's the same inspection, albeit a little bit later. The best time to do it is before you close, because the builder is the most motivated at that point because they don't have their money yet, to get those items repaired. But you still have at least somewhat of an option to do it during the warranty period. But I don't think there's anything as an entity here that we could do.
I mean, but one of my guys, as he pulled the ladder out of the truck and headed for the house, the builder stood in front of me and said, "Where are you going with that?"
Yeah.
You can't go on it. It's like,
I would want to tell me it was an OSHA, violation if I'm on the roof without a harness. No, that's not quite how
there's
OSHA
an
works.
exception for us.
That's not quite how OSHA works, but
Yeah.
it's, Brian.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think it's an issue, but I don't think we as a committee have the legal power to interfere with somebody's contractual rights, So I don't think we can do much on this one.
It's the only places if it wasn't, there's no limitations on what a builder can put in their contract.
I think in the end, what the best we could do as an industry is just educate our clients. Here's what it is. Really read through and find out that information before you sign that contract with that builder. Find out exactly what their requirements are, if that's something you're willing to accept. Know that you can get it done outside of the, during the warranty period. Some of the other issues during the warranty period, the builder will not refuses to accept an inspection report from a homeowner on a warranty request. Like, no, you have to manually write out every single thing that you want fixed. I mean, it's getting pretty crazy. I'd love to see, builders get some regulation, but that's a huge hill to climb that unfortunately we can't do. So, any other comments on the subject? All right.
I just thought it was
Yeah.
different topic.
Sure.
I'd sent out an email a month or two ago about Inspector Insights, which I haven't gotten in probably 2 years. I'd forgotten that I wasn't even getting it. And I just think there used to be good information in it that many other inspectors might be missing out on too.
Absolutely. I've got an update on that. I'm sorry we didn't email you before this meeting. We can follow up with you on your specific issue. I have screenshots that show where you receive it and then where you open it.
Okay, but
So we've got to figure out what the disconnect is. I'm not saying you're wrong.
Yeah.
I'm just saying there must be something happening with you specifically.
okay, as long as it's just me, that's better than being a lot of people.
We have statistics on how many people are opening it, and I know we've talked about this several times, but I don't really know what else to do with this other than to handle it on a per issue basis, because we know people are reading it.
Okay.
But in the end, if you're not getting it, speak up, send an email to TREIC. You can send it to me. It's fine. I can pass that along as well. I ran into the same issue. I wasn't getting it.
Yeah.
It's like I was writing the darn things, but I wasn't getting them. It's like, I'm pretty sure I know what's in the darn thing. So yeah, I think there's something there. And so I think if you're not getting them, just let us know, let TREIC know, and they can track your individual email address down and see if we can figure that out. Because the last couple I did get. So, all right. With that, we'll move on to item 7, reports from subcommittees. Education subcommittee. Sean, short time. Sean.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it wasn't a good night for the Houston Astros, but we got to this afternoon. So anyways, morning, everybody. Education subcommittee met on September 13th. And we have 2 items that we will be up for discussion, possible action today, item 9, item 10. So those are the 2 things we kind of hammered out on that date. And other than that, that's all we have to, we'll discuss everything else in more detail when we get to those items.
Sounds good. Thanks, sir. SOP subcommittee, Mr. Steve.
SOP subcommittee, we did have a web subcommittee meeting and discussed some of the things that are on the agenda today, the fillable form and check boxes, and also discussed about starting the new kind of biannual review of the SOP.
Fun stuff. Yeah, we'll probably start the next review of the SOPs in January when we get our new committee members and restructure our subcommittees. So I know it feels like we just finished that, but it is a ongoing and long tedious process to do an SOP review. So now is the pertinent time to do that, but we'll wait until we have our new committee members. Item number 8, staff reports, executive division.
I'll stay so short. We have a few moving parts just happening this season. We're in legislative implementation season around here. That seems to be kind of summer and fall, which is a heavy lift for us. We also had some rule changes effective October 1st that have been a heavy lift, as well as our RAMP project, which is our new regulatory database that really touches every corner of our agency. I hope to be able, about this time next year, if not before, brag about the rollout of that database. But that is taking, whole divisions have taken about a week or two where they have meetings all morning, they break for lunch, and then all afternoon to talk about the tailoring of that database for our needs. So it's a significant use of our time. I'm really proud of how staff has handled that. But that front end time will hopefully turn into a really effective system that will replace what we call Verset now, which is kind of the back end system that plugs in like all of our license holder information. It's how we process payments. It's how we process disciplines. It's how we process all of our renewals and applications and such. So we should be fancier and shinier by next fall, but more importantly, more efficient and effective.
And we have since taken off, one of the changes was taking off the address information on TREIC's website.
Yes, and that was what Tony was mentioning earlier. The same thing that caused us to pull all of our minutes and materials down from the website have also caused us to remove, the reason for that is that we're removing information that by law is now confidential. And so we were scrubbing our website to make sure we weren't inadvertently listing some of that now confidential by law information, which includes email addresses, addresses, phone numbers, personal information, as well as some other things. So the license holder lookup looks different and is for between license holders probably less useful because it doesn't contain that contact information. A lot of people have said, well, can we just make it confidential to the public, but among license holders, can we have some sort of back-end use? And the answer is no, it is confidential by law. So it's confidential for us to give that information to anyone, including license holders. So the other side of that coin is that over time, our license holders will likely or hopefully see reduced marketing efforts or spam that originate from our website as the source for that personal information. Of course, they still have that personal information from before the law went into effect, but it will become less useful as it ages. So we get a lot of complaints. Why are you selling my phone number, my email, my address to people? We're not. We're giving it away for free, but now we cannot give it away. And that was not just for TREIC, it was for all licensing agencies.
Yep.
Does that help?
Did that include the high value data set?
So we still have the high value data set, but it does not include that personal information. We do include the county. So for purposes of like searching, you can see if it's a little bit more helpful in determining whether or not you have the right person.
They took zip code off, came off.
Zip code came off.
Zip code came off.
The zip code is a good way to search.
The county is the only one that was left, right?
Yes.
It's the only real identifier.
What is this high value data set?
High value data set is the source that
Awesome.
the information was public, right? The personal information. And so we would make that available through a spreadsheet essentially that was available on our website that people could download. What that did is it kept us from having to respond to public information requests to produce that information. It was just available on our website.
Oh,
And
just
that-
like the downloads, like spreadsheet of all the inspectors?
Mhm.
So,
Yes,
okay,
and
okay.
all their info.
There's
So-
one for each license, and I use the inspector one a lot. I mean, it has,
Yeah, I'm just curious. what we were talking
MLSs
about.
would use it. I mean, we're not even certain all of the uses of that data
Yeah.
set, but it changed substantially once that law went into effect.
Now, will it still be listed, the committee members' contact information? So if members of the public want to have, so how do we?
If you're a license holder, we can't do it. It's confidential by law.
I do believe we have what we call an alias on the website. That,
I'm not sure inspector members have an alias email. Though.
So
We can
you-
get one, we can try to get one for
so
them.
staff has the old contact page for staff. Now it's like alias contact information.
Commissioners and board members have a TREC email address. I don't believe inspector members have an email address like that, but we could look into it if that.
I mean, I just like to have a way for stakeholders in the public, if they want to contact somebody on the committee, whether it be an inspector member or a public member, that they have the means to do that without doing a public information request.
I'll investigate if we can add you guys and just give you a TREC email. I don't know what the status is of that, but I can see what we can find out.
What do you think of one just for the inspector committee? that
I'd be
you
fine
would
with
have
that too.
access to, just a generic.
Oh, yeah, that might be.
I'd be fine with that too. And it goes to that one and it goes to all of us. I'd have no problem with that.
I'll look,
Well,
I'm,
that's
Just don't reply.
Okay.
Yeah.
yeah, I'm gonna put a note here to check on that.
I'd just like
It could
some
be it
way.
could be a one-way.
Yeah.
Easy way.
I just want some way, if a stakeholder or somebody in the public is coming on there, some accessibility to this committee.
So if it was a no reply inspector committee one, you could get emails in with information, but you would have to respond directly to them because it doesn't send.
Which is fine.
And I do want to know, I think right now, all emails go to the GC inbox, so the GC, general.counsel@trec.texas.gov, they go to us.
Right.
For dissemination. And I think there may be some open meeting issues with having an email address that goes to multiple folks on the committee. But
Right. Even if Steven says if it only goes to one, whoever the chair may be at that particular time.
You have the baton. You,
Always
and your
enjoy it.
assistant.
I'm on that too over here. My 13 years is almost up too. All right. So if we can look at that, like I said, I just like
I got it.
some accessibility for this committee for people that may not be able to attend these meetings. Is that what you had?
That's all I had. Do you have any questions? Have I missed anything? Is there something you want to know about? Okay.
Enforcement, Tony Renteria.
Good morning, Tony Renteria, Enforcement Staff Attorney and Liaison to the Inspector Committee. First of all, I want to welcome all the new members to the committee. Welcome aboard. We look forward to working with you and with the Inspector Committee and any subcommittees. There is a inspector disciplinary report that we prepared. There are 6 cases that are listed there. And we are open to answering any questions if you have any questions about this, any of these cases.
Anybody have any questions for Tony on these cases?
I don't think so.
Seeing, hearing none?
Just a reminder, this report will shorten again because it reflects all of last fiscal year because our fiscal year ends at the end of August. So there's a few cases on here from this current fiscal year end, so a lot of these will disappear and we'll just have the 2024 stuff going forward at the next meeting.
All right. Anything else, Tony?
Nothing else. Thank you.
Education and exams, Ms. Jen.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I would also like to welcome new members, and I will miss the outgoing members, but I look forward to continued collaboration. This committee does great things.
I like your cover sheet. The blue one.
Thank you, thank you.
She goes first.
I'm looking for ways to spice them up. As far as the education report, like Mike said, these are all fiscal year end data. The only thing that I kind of want to highlight, as we've talked about over the last few quarters, is that, I've seen a pretty solid increase in applications across the board. And as we did close out FY 2023, that remained true. In all 4 major categories of applications, we are higher than we have been in over the last 5 years. And that is on Amber, just kind of highlighting page, if you don't mind scrolling a couple. Yeah, keep going. One more. So this is an example, or just kind of a reflection of the overall year over year. And I know it's kind of hard to see the numbers, but they are steadily increasing, which is great. It's a healthy education environment.
On TREIC's lookup tool, you used to be able to see when you pulled up somebody's information, whether, depending on which license they had, it would also show if they were an education provider, and that has since gone away. Why did that get taken off?
So you can still search by, I think we had this discussion or something similar. Did you ask about instructors previously, or was it providers?
I think it was providers, because it used to be when I pulled mine up, I could see both licenses, and I used to be able to see that my company was also a provider, and then that has since disappeared.
Okay, let's take a look.
I don't know if I've ever seen that.
I know that, we do have the search approved courses, search approved providers, which is there. It's separate from the licensee lookup. You can look up an education provider using the licensee lookup tool if you just select that license type. But I don't know. I would have to look back into that. I can't think of a way that the system would identify, like would tie you two together through an entity number that would then be reflected publicly.
Well, it used to, and now it doesn't. So
Okay.
I just didn't know what had changed. So I mean, yeah, you can pull it up. The license type education providers is there. It's just I didn't know why it got removed from that, or what happened that changed it.
I can look into it.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, but that is all I have for the education report. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Moving forward, licensing, Ms. Denise.
Yeah, good morning. Denise Sample, Director of Licensing. Again, welcome, just like Jen and Tony said, welcome to the new committee members, and thank you to the outgoing ones. My reports are on page 18, and so this is through the end of the fiscal year, which ended in August. And that first report is total applications received in the fiscal year. The inspectors are in the lower left corner of this page. And so, we have been noticing a decline in the number of applications that have been received. And this just shows a comparison to the previous fiscal year. The next page shows the renewal activity. And that's one we've also been monitoring closely. On the right-hand side of that report is where the inspector renewal activity is listed. So the professional inspectors, as we've seen, most apprentices end up upgrading either through eventually as a real estate, or they, most of the applicants come straight in as a professional inspector. So that's kind of the number we're more focused on. And that renewal rate is holding pretty steady compared to last year. The next report has the license holder counts, and you'll see inspectors kind of in the center of this table. And we've broken out the active number of inspectors. So that's as of August 31st, the total number of current licensed inspectors. That's across all the 3 different ranks. And then the subset there is the number of active license holders.
So we've hit our peak and we're starting to see a drop.
We are seeing a
I think
decline.
everybody anticipated,
Right.
so that's not a big surprise.
Right. So the next page, if you look at the graph with the bar in yellow, that's the total inspector counts. That's a 13-month comparison for the fiscal year, August to August.
It's interesting how us and right-of-ways have all started to drop off, but the agents and brokers have not yet.
They have not. The total license holder count continues to increase, even though it's a smaller increase, but it's mainly driven by the sales agent numbers.
It's crazy.
So then that last page of my report is the license application processing time. Our goal is 14 calendar days to provide a response to an applicant. So that's after reviewing the documentation that's submitted with an application. And so you'll see the 3 inspector application types in the center there. And in August, we were less than 5 days for turning around a professional inspector and a real estate inspector application. As a reminder, this does not include the time it takes the applicant to pass the exam or clear the fingerprint-based background history check. But this is just the amount of time the licensing team spends reviewing an application.
I know, and Steve will remember being on as long as we have, but back in the days, those numbers were quite larger, both from the licensing and the education, getting CE credits and whatnot. I know you guys hear it from the commissioners at their meeting, but I want to make sure it's not just notice there, it's notice here too, that the amount of improvement that's happened over the last few years on both you guys' departments on getting the timelines and getting those things approved, licenses, CE courses, providers, stuff like that is absolutely impressive, and it's greatly appreciated.
Well, the revamping of the education requirements also helped tremendously. So that's also a credit to the work that this committee did in revamping that. But I do want to give kudos to Jen's team for the work in allowing the providers to post the inspector CE electronically. All of those things kind of happened at the same time, and it's really streamlined the process from all directions.
I know posting, being able to post real estate agents ones and doing that online, and then having to manually send in the inspector stuff was just, that was brutal. It's like, I don't want to teach inspector classes because it's so much easier. But
Right.
Yeah. No, making that's streamlined it quite a bit. But no, watching those timelines. Same with people that call into TREIC and the call times, seeing that on the commissioner's packet and those timeframes going from hours to minutes, and it's been pretty impressive, and it does not go unnoticed. So thank you all.
Well, and one thing I do want to add as well is when we're doing the work in tailoring the replacement system, it's all with an eye to improve it even more. Where can we gain efficiencies? Where can we make this even a smoother process than it is now? Like making all of the, inspector applications available online and finding your sponsor, having that all be connected online. That's what we're working towards.
Yeah. Even I renewed last year, and that process, that was quick. I think it was it wasn't even a business day. I think it did it on a Friday, and by Monday morning it was there.
Yeah.
Usually Sunday, somebody's putting them out on.
Yeah. No, it was
We had
pretty
2 new
impressive.
licensees this last month, and those were within a couple of days.
Yeah.
Once they got all the paperwork in.
That's been great.
So that concludes my report. If there are any questions, happy to answer them.
Any questions for Denise? Check the. Nope. Okay. All right. Item number 9, discussion of possible action regarding Texas practicum evaluation form and Texas credit request form. So there's 2 things there. The practicum evaluation, which we've kind of gone back and forth on a number of different things. We're going to kind of hold off on that one because there's some shore up as far as rules go that we wanted to look at. Sean and I and Tony have discussed that, so we're just kind of pulling that. We'll bring that back to the committee when it's ready. But we did want to look at the Texas credit request form, which is the form that is used to request the credit for the actual practicum. And the thing that we wanted to look, the only change that I had, oops, let's get on the right page here. Evaluation form.
Yeah, we had talked about adding a signature.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so we met and we went through this form. Initially, the form Tony had a signature for the student, and we had a lot of discussion about that me and Lee talked about the other day. So we really wanted to get feedback from the committee on adding a signature here below their name, just kind of attesting that this stuff has happened, because the supervisor and inspector is going to have to sign too.
So part of the thought process on adding a signature line for the student is when an instructor looks at this form to submit credit or to be able to approve this, there's a list there at the top that says a student may request credit for completing the 4-hour practicum based on the satisfaction of the following criteria. And these little bullet points up there detail out exactly what that instructor and student should have accomplished in order to approve this practicum. So it kind of gives, in its current state, it gives the supervisor, hey, here's everything you should have done throughout that 40-hour practicum. But what we want to also make sure is that the student signs it. So instead of just taking the form, not ever reading it because they didn't have to sign it and just shipping it off with their paperwork, to have a spot for the student to sign it so that the student understands that they also were supposed to complete at least 5 complete in-person inspections, no more than 4 students, so on and so forth, so that everybody's on the same page. So just, it's not a substantive change, but I think just adding that little signature line, is it going to force the student to actually read that? No, but in theory, if somebody is signing something, we at least hope that they actually read through it. It increases the chances that they know what they should have gone through with the practicum. Because I think there's a lot of talk about students that come through and they didn't actually, what they did or didn't get in the 40-hour practicum, and whether it was actually, they actually did 5 inspections or they just sat in a room and in a video and did that type of stuff. So we're trying to make sure that the student and the instructor alike know exactly what the requirements are for that practicum and that those are actually completed.
I'm still waiting to meet one that did 5 inspections.
I'm kind of in the same boat, which again, we're trying to find ways to make sure that 5 inspections actually, at least 5 inspections actually get done.
When I bring it up, I get the deer in the headlights.
Yeah. But the key point.
And this form gets sent in with their application.
Bruce?
Yeah, we discussed that and tried to eliminate that inspector who's just got approved, got his new professional license, and wants to call you up and ride around with you to see what you're doing. So the question is, if this person doesn't know what he's doing and he signed that form, what the heck is going on? So that was kind of the premise behind doing that. Maybe it would put some responsibility.
Yeah.
So by having both signatures, we're trying to at least increase some accountability there on the backside. But for me, the key part in those little bullet points is under supervising inspector and says was considered satisfactory for release to a consumer. I mean, because that is the goal. By the time, the whole point of the practicum is that you get through a few inspections and you are ready to be out and completely, totally on your own with consumer, ready to produce a report that is, within Texas SOP guidelines. So is it going to fix 100% the problem? Absolutely not. But we got to find little steps to try and get us to the goal of where we want it to be. So, do we need a motion for that, Tony? Because it's a non-substantive change as far as just adding a signature line, right? Or do we need a motion to?
This doesn't need to go to the commission for approval, does it?
Like a new form number?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the form would. So let's.
Oh, really?
Just to make it clean? Just do a motion to make it clean and done? Okay, so entertain a motion to approve the form with the added signature line.
I make that motion.
Second.
Motion by Mike, second by Steve. Any other discussion on this item?
There's a typo on the form.
There's a typo on the form. Where is it at?
Very bottom, perform at least 200 real estate inspection
Oh,
instead of
thank you.
inspections.
Thank you. I'll fix that.
There we go. That's why we have multiple eyes. All right, any other discussion? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, saying no. Motion passes. Folks. Yes, sir.
Shannon Gatewood, just one comment and one question. I know you're not talking so much about the practicum evaluation form, but just for continuity, 4, 5, and 6, instead of instructing inspector, should be supervising inspector, right? I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah, so it says instructing inspector. And then that led me, as I was reading that, is there something that says the supervising inspector has to actually be the one on site? Or can it be one of his team members saying, oh yeah, take them out, show them how to do it, and then I'll come back and sign the form? Just open a can of worms there.
Oh, you're talking about the evaluation form, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yep. Yeah, have a couple issues we still have to look at with the evaluation.
Yeah, like I said, I know you weren't talking
No,
about.
no, it's perfect. It's good feedback. All right. Item number 10, discussion and possible action regarding education requirements for apprentice inspector license. Mr. Sean.
Again, we, in our last meeting, we went over this when we met. Tony can speak to more detail of it, but this is way early in the process because this is going to require statutory training, correct, Tony?
Yeah.
On this. Yeah.
So I can let Jen probably has more expertise in terms of talking about what's on the form, but essentially the committee had asked you guys to look at possibly adding education. And so this is in front of the committee basically because we need some direction as to whether or not you're okay with the recommendation from the subcommittee. And if so, if you want staff to move forward on possible legislative changes, there's a process by which we need to do that. And it's a bit of a long runway, but.
And just to clarify, we didn't just randomly come up with hours like, okay, who wants 2, who wants 4. We looked at a lot of other states, what they're requiring. We put a lot of thought and consideration in each category and how much time we would have spent on each one of those. So, we met several times over this form, and it's like Tony said, we're just kind of putting this out here to see, is this the direction the committee wants to go on? Because I know we've talked about changing up how their apprentices are licensed and, making sure that they have an idea of what they're supposed to be doing when they get out there and start training.
So the recommendation is a 4-hour introductory course before you get licensed as an apprentice.
I can see an orientation or something like that.
It's kind of what it looks like. And I like what's in the 4 hour. My concern is, and I had mentioned this previously, and let me back up real quick. For those that are kind of new to me, what we're talking about. We currently have 3 license types: apprentice, real estate inspector, and professional. The apprentice and real estate inspector licenses are very underutilized, very, very small numbers of what's there. So what we've been talking about is a possibility of getting rid of one of the license types. Now, this will not affect current license holders in those respective license types. It would be only affecting new applicants for those license types. But the general consensus of where we were going was to get rid of the real estate inspector license and just have the apprentice and the professional. So the question that was put to that committee was, what currently there are no education requirements to be an apprentice inspector. And if we're going to get rid of one of the license types, should we not have some type of educational requirement for in order to be an apprentice that's there? So the proposal here is for the 4 hours, and I like the content of those 4 hours. I like what's there. My only contention here would be, I personally think that if you're going to get in this industry, now we don't want to put huge roadblocks or barriers into getting into the industry. But I think if you're going to start in this industry and start down that path of being an apprentice and going forward through all this, I like the 4 hours, but I would still like to see the 8-hour SOP course be required for apprentices. I think to start off in this industry, the first thing you got to start off with is the SOPs. I mean, that governs everything that we do. If we leave it this 4 hours, I think there's a whole lot of interpretation that could happen depending on who the instructor is or who the sponsoring inspector is in teaching those SOPs to that person, to that apprentice. I think if the apprentice starts off with the actual rules of what the SOPs are by taking the existing 8-hour SOP course, I think that starts them off with the right foundation of the information that they would need in order to perform inspections and go down this process. Anybody else have thoughts?
I just want to bring up that the SOP course is a renewal course, and there's some foundational knowledge expected, I think, when you take that course. So I understand, I hear you 100% where you're going with that, but could that look like something else?
But don't we have a qualifying SOP course for people doing going the professional route?
Oh, okay. You're not talking about
It's
okay.
in one of the modules.
That's not only 8 hours.
No.
That's a module course.
How many hours is that?
It's one of the pieces of the building.
It is 24 hours.
Okay.
The Texas SOP is the 24 in Texas.
Yeah, and that's what we have in their standards of practice where that would be a mandated section to cover. But we wanted to, we talked about the 8-hour class, but like you said, it's a renewal class. And we felt like that we wanted to put as little, we don't want to make it as restrictive as possible. I mean, ultimately the sponsoring inspector is responsible for this. So this class is just a initial, this is what your sponsor's, supposed to be doing with you. This is what you're supposed to be doing in the house, just an initial overview, and then their training starts from there. Because I don't know if we have enough discipline problems to justify 8-hour, 12-hour classes to restrict access to people becoming apprentices.
And the 8-hour course, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't just SOPs. It's SOP and legal, right? So it's not 8 hours of SOP either.
4 hours.
Yeah.
Well, but I think what Lee clarified is that you weren't referring to the 8-hour CE course.
But I think even if we did a 4-hour SOP course, even if we created a new course, to me, it's just, I think what happens with instructors is you can go to 4 different places, 4 different instructors that teach something, and they will teach completely different things, even though it's the same subject. Every instructor is a little different, and how they do it is going to be a little different. If somebody's going to start off as an apprentice and going through this process, I think even if it's 12 hours total, I don't think 8 hours or 12 hours is a huge roadblock to get into a completely different industry to start off. I just don't see that as being a huge roadblock in today's world. But even if we create a 4-hour just SOP, I would like to see, if somebody's going to start off an apprentice, I would like to see some consistency up front of knowing exactly what those SOPs are, so that as that apprentice goes through, they have that baseline information to start, not what somebody else's interpretation of the SOPs could be.
They all start at the same foundation.
They all start at the same foundation. That's my goal here.
But at the same time, there's a desire to also teach them on what their sponsoring inspector is supposed to be doing with them and what their responsibility is as an apprentice is. So you have to, that's why we laid out all these different things that we talked about. The SOPs are in there, the report forms in there, but the apprentice inspector, if we're going to train them, they also need to have some knowledge on what their responsibility is to the client, what the proper etiquette is in a home, what the sponsoring inspector is supposed to be doing, what they can do as an apprentice.
Kind of like that preamble.
Right. No, and I completely agree with that. And I'm not talking replacing these components. I think these are essential. I think this is good information, and they need to know that information. That's a good baseline for that too. I would like to see the actual SOPs, which govern every single thing that we do, to start off. Everybody starts off with the same base plate from the get-go. Bruce, you had something? Bruce?
You're muted.
Can't hear you, Bruce. Bueller? Yeah.
Just looking through the other licensed state agencies that have apprentices, I can't find any of them that have any requirements other than legal to work in the US.
Exactly. That's, and most of the other licenses or apprentices in Texas don't require any education before.
It's just a challenge. Not saying
like an
it's
applicator hiring an apprentice pest control guy, you're going to train them. You're going to do all the training in-house.
Have you had an apprentice? Like, how do you teach them SOPs now?
I don't do apprentices, but I've run across a lot.
Who don't know the SOPs?
Who don't know the SOPs. And granted, keep in mind, this is also a really small number of license holders that we're talking about too.
What is that number? Like,
Out of 4,700, there's what, maybe 500 between both the two licenses?
I think it's less than that. I think it's less than that.
It's
like how many
2%.
apprentice
Yeah, it's like
licenses
2
will
and
we
2 and
get a year?
2%, something like that.
And Lee, with this.
How many we
be
issue or how many
something
apps?
Provider would.
How many applications we get?
How many currently licensed?
Providers?
It'd be a qualifying
I can
education.
find that,
provider.
but we got
Yeah.
44 apprentice inspector applications last fiscal year.
44.
Mhm.
Okay, so whatever classes are being created for this track are for like a nominal number of
Yeah.
people.
Correct.
Most don't, 93% just go straight to professional.
Right. That's the more logical way to go. Absolutely. All right, Bruce, you got your hand back up.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, when we first discussed this 4-hour class that we're talking about for newlies, the apprentices, we discussed some type of orientation, what was expected out of them, not to get involved in how to do this or how to do that, but to let them understand what they're supposed to do in their conduct and everything else when they get at the job site and things of that nature. And I agree with you that everybody needs a basic 101 program on SOP and new changes and everything. But in the very beginning, when you have a new apprentice, that would be the first thing I would make them do is take that little 4 hours so they know what they're getting into and what's expected out of them and what their conduct's going to be.
Okay. All right, so. All right, kind of feel like I don't want to beat a dead horse here. So, but it looks like everybody's good with the 4. 4 is better than what we have currently for apprentices. So we can look at moving forward with this if that's the direction everybody wants to go. And then once it gets implemented, which will be obviously way down the line, because it's a long process. If we start seeing that we're having some inconsistencies, we can reevaluate it.
And it's still the hurdle of even getting it past the legislature.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is step 1 of a 500-step process.
Right. So, and probably need to get some feedback from the industry as well, because you can file a bill and if a bunch of inspectors come out shaking their fists about it, it's not going to, so it's a long process, but we just, like I said, just need some direction from the committee as to whether staff needs to pursue it.
Okay. So anybody have anything as far as not pursuing this current course of action for apprentice pre-licensure? Bless you. All right. Bless you again. You only get 2 blessings.
Thank you for both.
So, all right. We good with that one then?
Would you want to pursue a non-mandatory path while waiting for anything future, just making an orientation that's highly recommended, but it's there?
Like creating this course now?
As a voluntary process. I mean, sponsoring inspectors would probably love it.
Find a benefit to it.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work to put in.
Well, yeah,
Volunteer
if you
course.
wanted to do it, I mean, yeah.
What if we created, and we've talked
Just an
for a long
overview.
time, Summer might hate me saying this, but this is kind of a
She's not here. We can
long-term
do it.
project. She's on there.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
Um,
All right. We're going to get Summer on something.
Our goal is to have some targeting communication for, we write these articles and put them on our website, and some of them are reach a certain audience at a certain point in their license cycle that's particularly important. And so what we've talked about doing, she has a name for it, I can't remember, that we kind of roll out articles that are already there to a certain population when they're the most helpful to them. So when we get applicants for the apprentice license, it seems like we could have an article available that says, here's how you can get the most out of your apprentice experience. You need to know about the SOPs. Basically kind of an outline to what this course would be, instructing them to go get this information through their sponsoring inspector.
Yeah.
it wouldn't be the same as a voluntary course, but it would kind of help them know how to be equipped, maybe in a similar way.
Could we encourage them to take a course? Even like the SOP, even if it's not mandatory,
I think it's just a matter of the extent of developing a course that isn't mandatory. And if the population is, let's say, 44 people last year, and let's say 10% of them decided to take it, well, then that's a class for less than 5 people.
Right.
Is that right? Did I do my math right?
Yeah.
There are no half people, so.
Right.
Well.
Till they get licensed.
Okay, all right.
and devil's advocate here, I know a couple of wives that have gotten their apprentice license specifically to help write reports. Now, this type of course would be definitely beneficial because of the verbiage we have to put in our reports. But I could all see them going, why should we have to do that? We're not doing inspections. We're not the inspector.
But they can. I mean, there are a number of apprentices that are, the 10-year mark.
Yeah.
They are just that. They're permanent.
Permanent apprentice.
I have a permanent apprentice.
Yep.
In my group, because he has no plans to go anywhere else. He's just
Well, I'm looking at hiring an admin, and one of the requirements is going to be to have an apprentice license.
Really?
I like the idea of sending that out on the initial app.
I just got a quick question.
Yeah.
The SOP courses, if I am the sponsoring inspector, there's nothing that stops me from making a prerequisite for me sponsoring you to take this course, because you don't have to have a license to take the course.
Right.
So me as a sponsoring inspector could put this requirement on anybody that I want.
Absolutely. But I like the idea of, once they apply for the apprentice license, to send out information that kind of guides them, hey, here's some stuff that you may not have already heard already, but something you want to go after.
It's called a drip campaign.
There you go.
Summer just messaged. So you drip out information as it's helpful to the person.
the recruiter didn't tell me about all that.
Yeah. I like the idea of a course, but I think it would be completely underutilized. And I don't want to have people put through a lot of time and effort and go through the process. And
it could be in the advisor.
Well, I think you also, the aspect from the education provider perspective, I don't know that there would be a lot of drive to create a course for, for 4.4 people until it becomes a requirement to use voluntarily.
Even if,
yeah, I mean.
It'd be a harder stretch. It'd be a hard stretch even 4.4 required.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Just a point of clarification, I was speaking more in terms of, this course is fine, but I was speaking in terms of the SOP. course.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Anything else on item 10? All right, moving right along. Item number 11, discussion possible action regarding fillable fields on the property inspection report form REI 7-6. Mr. Steve.
So we discussed the pros and cons of having a fillable form. And granted, a lot of governmental agencies that have mandatory forms are, fillable, but they're not as dynamic as our inspection report. They're fixed in size, where our report really couldn't be. And the benefits would be, it would limit the inspector or the person filling it out to fill places that you couldn't, or you're not supposed to go to. So that's kind of nice. We talked about if we did make it fillable, the things you would obviously fillable would be maybe the header, footer, check boxes, and then the space after comments, or if there's a mandatory note requirement. And then the question is, how big would you make it after the comments? And we kind of threw around 2 to 3 lines, and anything more than that, it would be on supplemental paper. That way it would kind of limit what to do with pictures. I'd say probably if you wanted to have a fillable, pictures would be on the supplement. They would be in the same sequence, but okay, a picture on the foundation would be in the supplement with pictures of the foundation, anything that ran over 2. The idea was if we're going to make it fillable, there had to be some limitations. pictures would be on additional and more than say 2 lines would be on an additional page or 3, something like that. But that way it would provide one, it could be fixed to certain areas that they're allowed to go to, the check boxes, the area after comments or after the mandatory notes. And then I think the report, header and filler on the page. So it could be done.
Part of the issue is you start getting, if you're with your comments one, if you start making more, you run into a programming issue of having that fillable box expanding as you put too much in there. And
That's why we
whatnot.
talked about just 2 lines,
Creates a bit of a
2 or 3
nightmare.
lines. But even if you stretched every section to 3 lines, the form has a definable size that it could go to, and then it rolls over to additional paper, additional
How
pages.
helpful is it just to had 2 or 3 lines per section?
Well, at what point do you cut it off? Where's the line? And that's I can see that argument. And the whole thing is, I think this is something that will be very underutilized.
Well,
the whole point of it is that license holders will have at least some means of use of a fillable form that they don't have to purchase software.
yes.
So why could it not be a Word document that expands as much as needed?
I mean,
And the stuff that has to be there is protected where it can't be changed.
depends on
to me, it
the
doesn't sound-
capabilities of creating a protected form that would restrict editing to where we'd want, just like any other form. I mean, just like any other government agency form usually is, the vast majority are PDFs, and even when you go in Adobe, it'll tell you, you're restricted, and this is the only place you can do it. But they are not dynamic in far as growth. They are fixed for the most part. There's very few that might have an area that grows, but for the most part, they're fixed. But, the idea is probably a reasonable idea of having a method to provide a report without having to buy a third party. Again, we're probably talking the 4 or 5 people that would take the apprentice training. There's not very much, but once created, it's there and would probably need minor tweaking with form changes forever.
I'd be okay if we put 3 lines in there. I don't think 3 lines is gonna be a big difference from 3 and 2. And then it's one of those where if you're doing the report on this form and you want to add pictures, I'd be like, see picture 3 or whatnot. You add supplemental stuff on
The
the back.
supplemental pages have always been required to be in the same sequence and, labeled, this is supplemental for, 1A, foundation.
Yeah.
That's the way they've had supplemental
It's
before.
tedious and whatnot, but as an entity, TREIC doesn't need to be creating, a software for inspectors to use. There are other avenues that are there. Savvy.
I was just gonna add, so Amber did kind of do a mock-up here of making that form fillable after the comments. And she did try to do 3 lines, I think was the request. But she did put a stop in the number of characters. So sometimes, when you type for a while on an Adobe Acrobat document, it will expand and keep going. On this version, I think you put an end. So there's only a certain number of characters that can fit in that space.
Rather than saying 3 lines, it's a certain number of characters. It's
Yeah, I
probably
think it's
close to
the
that.
equivalent of
That's
3
probably
lines.
easier.
So, yeah.
Whatever's in that shadowed box, you can't go
Yeah, I
past.
can't go
Whatever
beyond
fits in
that.
the box, that's it.
And the shadow part for the comments portion could actually, after the first line, word wrap all the way to the left margin, which
Yeah,
would
it
give
goes-
them more room.
Yeah, it automatically will go to the next line, but when it gets to the end of the 3rd line or whatever, you can't,
It just stops.
it just stops, yeah.
And I think when we had the committee meeting, there might have been 1 or 2 that had the ability to write in a place where we didn't need to write, but it
Yeah.
looks like you fixed those.
Yep.
Yep. It would look something like that.
I mean, and this all came about because of comments, public comments that we received about, the requirement, so to say, of having to purchase software. I think for the small amount of people that would actually utilize this form, I think it's pretty reasonable.
I mean, I don't think it's really been hard to find a Word version of the report and do like you're saying, but you also have this would limit somebody who's not real good with formatting in Word really messing it up.
And this doesn't prevent anybody from going out and getting software and whatnot.
This also provides a good document to use in the training. When you're trying to do those 5 inspections in our training without having to have them use whatever software you use or buy one, this is something they can use in the training field.
It's true.
This is, the practicum, there's something for the student to use for the practicum, and that might be a good motivation in addition to somebody asking for one.
Anybody have any other input on the form?
Because a new student in a practicum is probably not going to write a book.
True.
And you got a comment up there
You see it?
from Brenda.
Brenda, sorry, go ahead, Brenda. You're still, there you go. Go ahead, Brenda. Brenda Roebuck.
She's not muted, but
No, she's not, she unmuted, but not speaking. Or we can't hear. Can't hear anything from you, Ms. Roebuck. All right. Anybody else have anything to input on this? Good motion to go forward with that form?
I think so. It's, we don't need to do anything else with it because it's not a substantive change, but I think a motion.
Entertain motion for the creation of the fillable fields on the property inspection report form, REI 7-6.
I make a motion that we pursue the possibility, because we still may run into issues as far as building it but I think, I personally like the idea of having it as a tool to use for the training.
Steve, I think that is the form.
That is the form.
But I mean, making a fillable one.
I think that's the form is up.
Yes.
Yeah. So the motion
Can you
would be
reword the motion?
I guess to accept that one.
Yeah.
I like
I
that.
second it.
I didn't know if it needed more work or anything else.
Well, that's what you're saying. If there are tweaks, they're gonna be non-substantive.
So it's ready to publish. I make a motion, we accept it and use it.
All right, and then we had Brian as a second on that. Any other discussion on that? Ms. Roebuck? Trying to give you as much opportunity as I can.
It is a PDF.
It is, yeah.
Okay, any other discussion on the item? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Motion passes. All right, item number 12, discussion and possible action regarding revisions to the instruction sheet for the inspection report. So this kind of came up because the instruction sheet felt there were probably just a couple little verbiage changes we wanted to make to ensure consistency across the board and to help with enforcement in looking at different items there. And I know we're all tired of talking about check boxes. I get it. You know, it's everybody's tired of the checkbox thing. So just a little backstory for those who hadn't been here. We changed the rule a while back. Says if you check more than one box, there was a requirement that you had to have something in the comments. If you just checked inspected, there was no requirement you had to have anything else in there because you're assuming that it's inspected and there's no deficiencies. But if you say inspected and deficient, then you need to explain what that deficiency is within the comment section. Some of the question comes up And there were some inspectors that felt that there are times when they felt it necessary to check all 4 boxes on a particular item, depending on the situation that's there. I personally don't see the situation where I would feel comfortable checking all 4 boxes, but I don't want to prevent somebody from doing that. One of the examples that we had was a heat pump system when the temperature is over 70 degrees, because part of the departure provision is that you don't have to test the heat pump when the exterior temperature is above 70 degrees. So in that scenario, one inspector may say, and if the emergency heat works fine, everything, the filter is good, and all the other little, items are there, they may just say inspected and make a note in the comments that the heat pump was not tested due to a departure revision in the exterior temperature being 70 degrees. Other inspectors may say, oh, I'm going to check inspected and not inspected because I inspected the heating system being emergency heat, but I not inspected because the heat pump was not tested. So the question becomes, is it required to check inspected and not inspected or not? I think the way the rule was written, it's not required in that particular scenario. My concern is, and the reason why I don't do it is because from a consumer standpoint, if you check inspected and not inspected, that's just confusing to the consumer. So we'll put it at that. So
Some of it is that confusion, the not inspected was intended for something that you could inspect, but for some reason didn't. Not that you were restricted. There's some guys that just don't go on roofs.
Right.
Okay, you could. If you lined up 10 inspectors, 9 of them could do it, you didn't, that might be inappropriate, not inspected, and say why. Not inspecting the heat pump because of temperature, none of us should be doing it.
Right.
It just says we don't have to. But that, under that thought process, you wouldn't have to say not inspected because we don't have to disclose we're not inspecting something that we're not supposed to inspect.
But in your example, just because somebody didn't go on the roof didn't mean they didn't inspect it.
True. Well, from the roof surface, which is the standard. But there's, because of the format of our inspection form, it does combine things that could very easily check all 4. Ventilation, bath fans and heaters. May have a fan, may not have a heater. Present, not present. May have a broken one, may not have electricity. Because the form combines items, it's really pretty easy to have all 4. If it's a single item, it is harder. Disposal, it's hard to click all 4. But some of the combined doors and windows, it's easy to maybe hit all 4. But the idea, I think some of it is just education on when you have to use the not inspected. Through education, it's been kind of confusing to some.
I mean, to me, if I have components of a system like use doors and windows, if there's a door that's blocked by storage or whatnot, I'm still going to put inspected, and I'll put a caveat in the notes. Some doors could not be inspected, or storage room door could not be inspected. No key was provided, whatever. But I'm not going to inspect. I'm not going to check inspected and not inspected. I'm not.
Occupied homes, you might inspect half the windows because you can't get to half of them.
Right.
It's kind of nice to say that. They know that you didn't do all the windows.
Right.
It's kind of obvious to put a picture in there.
But the reason this kind of come back up is because I want to make sure from an enforcement standpoint that they have the information that they need to be able to enforce it properly. So if somebody didn't, in a heat pump scenario where they didn't, where they didn't check inspected and not inspected, that they don't get hit for, as long as all the information is actually there. The case that this kind of started with, it wasn't that disciplinary action should happen, but so.
Well, there was a particular term you wanted to change, I thought.
Yeah.
If you scroll, I know where it is. If you scroll up, Amber. I'm sorry, down. I apologize. I think it's on the second page. Let's see.
I think it was the inspected and non-inspected, both boxes may be checked.
That's what you want. Where it says should, you wanted to change that to may.
No, well,
The next one down.
Next one.
I was thinking up. So should all of the shoulds be mays? There's 3 of them there.
Well, no, I think for N, I, and D, that makes sense because if it was not inspected because it was deficient, you need to note if it's deficient.
Oh, yes.
And inspected and deficient, you need to do that if it's deficient. And then not present and not inspected, that would make sense as well, that both should be. If you didn't inspect it because it was not present, those would both be inspected. So it's really that last one where it's inspected and non-inspected, where, as Lee said, the confusion lies whether he wanted to change that in May because there's not, I'm not an inspector, but as Lee explained it to me, there's not a requirement that you have to check both boxes in those instances. It's just a may. And that if it's a may, so I think it would be may, and then if the inspector does check both boxes, the inspector must explain. I think that was the change you had talked
The
about.
key is explaining anything other than inspected.
Being clear to consumers. And there's some inspectors right now that because of all this, they're just checking all 4 boxes. They're like, I'm going to keep checking all 4 boxes until somebody disciplines me
I
against
think
it.
I'd have a comment for each one of them.
They're all tired of beating this dead horse too. Okay.
So the I guess enforcement's perspective is, before there was no requirement that to check multiple boxes. The issue arises because of the departure provision. So whenever an inspector departs, the rule says that the inspector shall make an appropriate notation on the inspection report form stating the reason that the component or system was not inspected. In the past, before we had the instruction sheet, I think there was, people would make a note just like we talked about, and that would be sufficient. After the instruction sheet came out, the instruction sheet tried to regularize everybody's understanding of what should be done. Because like you said, inspectors were confused and consumers were confused as well. So we're trying to provide better information to the consumer. So the issue on the departure provision is what is an appropriate notation. So we look at the rule 535.2235 along with the instruction sheet, and rule 535.2235 says that the inspector shall indicate by checking the appropriate boxes, plural, on the form. So whatever is appropriate, whether it's 1 box or multiple boxes, it should be checked. Whether each item was inspected, not present, and explain the findings as well. So that's how the rule reads. It does include the word shall, which means mandatory. They have to check the appropriate notation.
Right, but what one considers appropriate notation, as far as checking the boxes, and another can be interpreted differently.
Well, here's the thing though. In reviewing some of the enforcement matters that we have, we've taken some feedback from the consumers. The inspectors have their point of view, understandably. The consumers have an understanding. So some of the feedback that I can share with you is from complainants that have complained about the fact that the non-inspected box was not checked. That led them to believe that it was inspected, even though there was a notation on the report saying there was a limitation. But the fact that it wasn't, the inspected box was checked and the not inspected box was not checked, that led the consumer, the complainant, to believe that it had been inspected despite of the comment. So that's some feedback to consider. Now, when you look at it from the perspective of the rule, the wording of the rule, that the inspector shall indicate by checking the appropriate boxes on the whether each item was inspected. And then you look at the instruction sheet that we have here. The instruction sheet is telling the inspectors that it's appropriate to check both boxes when there's actually a section above as well that talks about, can you go to the first page, please? talks about when not inspected should be checked right there. It says not inspected. This box should be checked when a component or system, and then 3, when a system or component is present but cannot be fully inspected due to existing conditions and limitations. So this already is telling the inspector to check the not inspected. And it only applies in the situation where there's a departure.
That's not what that says, though.
A departure.
See, this says cannot be fully inspected. That could be interpreted as, I'm not pulling the heating node out of that electric water heater. It's not fully inspected, so I gotta check both boxes. I mean, that opens a huge can of worms.
True. So, but if it's not fully inspected, but that's what happened in this case.
Right.
Is it wasn't fully inspected. There was a departure but the box wasn't checked. Now, applying the rule and the instructions, then, and one thing we want to make clear is that there wasn't discipline for not checking the box.
Completely, yes.
Okay, that's not, I think that's one of the concerns that raised this issue, is that if I don't check the box, I'm going to get disciplined. That wasn't the basis of the discipline. The discipline was negligence for improper departure. That was a whole issue. So my feedback to you and to the committee is that, I'm just sharing some of the information I got from the complainant and the consumer. For them, it appeared that not checking the non-inspected box was important because they got the sense that it was inspected. So
my answer to the consumer on that was, my answer to that was, as a consumer, if your big complaint is that both check boxes weren't checked, but you didn't actually read the comments, that's the issue for me. You didn't read the report. If you weren't reading that section of the report, if you read the comment section and saw the departure in there, the check boxes isn't as much of an issue. Yes.
So I agree with you in that if the consumer needs a checkbox to cue them to read their inspection report, that's problematic.
Absolutely.
We spend the time to put the commentary in. It is the consumer's responsibility to take responsibility for themselves and read the report. I also would, my comment on the page 2 of the instructions, it says an inspector may check more than one box. I agree with you, Lee. If I'm going to check inspected, not inspected, to me seems a bit contradictory and to the consumer. And I'd rather check inspected and use departure in the comments to state what I could not operate or inspect. So we have this inspected and not inspected, but these are just examples of how you could do multiple check boxes. Not that it's requiring us to check more than one box unless we've inspected something and there's a deficiency that's found.
I mean, personally, I think a lot of this goes away if we get rid of the not inspected box.
Yeah.
I think if you just leave the inspected box unchecked, that's not inspected, and it kind of solves that problem. But that's a form change we can look at that.
I think an issue here is whether or not putting shall in when discussing with you, putting shall with inspected, non-inspected compels the inspector to do it where they might not, and also compels enforcement to react to it. So if it's not appropriate, I think it needs to be clarified. If it is appropriate, then we can leave it the way it is.
I think at the very least that one should be may.
May.
I think that one should be may on that one there. I do see.
And then change if the inspector checks both boxes, they must explain the portions that were inspected and non-inspected and why. So continue that. Okay.
We've also got a comment.
I think some of it is confusion on when something is a departure. Not inspecting the heat pump when it's 90 degrees is not a departure.
It's following the SOP,
It's the
which says you don't have to.
So the NI is only used, mainly used when there's a departure. If you don't inspect it because you're not supposed to, that's not a departure, that's following the SOP.
Well, if memory serves on the SOP, it doesn't say you can't test it if it's over 70. It's part of the departure provision that you don't have to.
And that may not be a really good example, but it's, most inspectors look at, you don't have to you don't have to go in a crawl space that's only 8 inches tall. Doesn't say you can't. I've emptied my shirts. Took in a breath, sucked in. But if it's only 8 inches tall, do you have to say you did not inspect it because the SOP says you don't have to go in there unless it's 18? I mean, there's a question of when is something a departure versus something that is, you're following the SOP?
Yeah, there's a difference between a departure and I would say a departure and a limitation.
Inspecting the roof of a 3-story house. If you don't inspect it, is that a departure?
The inspector deems that it's not safe to do so. It's how that's worded.
You don't even have to have a ladder.
If you're required to inspect something and you don't, for the reason stated in the rule.
But you only have to have a ladder that goes to 1 story.
Right. I mean, if they don't inspect it, they have to stay.
But I see what you're saying. If I was a consumer and I'm not familiar with the SOP, the report is what's going to tell me, but I can't depend on the check boxes or the summary. You got to read the whole thing. And granted, some of them are bound.
Wait, people read more than the summary?
You have a question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Was waiting for a break. Brian?
Yeah, I guess it was the part of what you kind of said there at the end. If you're the consumer rule, they don't understand. They don't even know you have SOPs. Candidly, as a public member, I didn't know you had an SOP until I came on this committee. And so if they look at the document and it says inspected, they're going to assume you looked at it all. And so I almost wonder, do you need like a partially inspected? Because they're not going to understand the nuance of, well, I didn't have to inspect it, therefore it's a NI versus it's a deviation, and I don't have to mark anything, type of there, or is that something that in our education, of both the consumer and the inspectors, we need to say, hey, you need to, write out if you only inspect part of it, it's checked and inspected, but not completely, inspected or something. So, I think that is a consumer concern.
That's the confusion. By doing that, we do check the inspected, not inspected, and then explain which portion of the item we didn't inspect. And that was kind of the intent.
So just to clarify a little further, in the past, the way we've addressed it is if there was a comment, just like in this report, there was a comment and that comment was sufficient departure because it was in there. Again, we didn't take discipline. We didn't discipline the inspector for not checking the box. I think in this case, because there was an improper departure, that kind of threw a curb into the whole situation and into the complainant's understanding of what happened, what didn't happen, what should have happened. And that was part of their expressing their displeasure with the report. But in the past, it's never been an issue if they didn't check the box. It's not an issue now. We didn't issue disciplinary action for that. The only thing we did is to try to educate the inspector based on how the instructions are written currently.
So I think changing that from should to may would certainly clear that specific issue up. Would it not? Tony?
I have another question then. Sure. So again, this is listed as examples.
Right.
My question would be for you, Tony. This is an example of how you could use those checkboxes. Would this be commentary that would be used to support disciplinary action, or is this simply examples?
The rules are what we based our discipline on. So we have to meet the elements of the rule or the violation. So that's really what we have to prove. I think this instruction sheet, again, when we cited it, it was cited more to educate the inspector. Like, had he checked the box in this case and described, that would have been helpful to the consumer. And so we're being consistent with the instruction sheet. So the direction that I'm getting is, again, to be clear, we're not issuing disciplinary action, to answer your question. If they check it or don't check it, so long as there's a notation, that suffices with the rule. What is appropriate notation is really what's under interpretation here. And the interpretation partly is based on this instruction sheet. If the instruction sheet is changed, then our interpretation also changes. So, but in any event, they weren't getting discipline now, and they're not going to get it in the future, even if we change that. But what I do get is some clarification that the box doesn't need to be checked so long as that comment continues to be on the report in terms of the proper departure.
I look at this and the way that that's currently written, it tells, if I'm an inspector, that is TREC telling me that if I only partially inspected because it's over 70 degrees in the heat pump scenario, that I better check both boxes or you're going to discipline me. To me, that's what that says.
It does say shall, yes.
Yeah. So that's why my suggestion would be to change it to may, because again, I think there's a responsibility in the consumer to read the actual report. I know it's crazy talk, but I think there is a responsibility there to read more than just what the check boxes are.
And that's true. And to your point, it was when we first talked about the instructions and checking inspected and not inspected. To me, it was contradictory as well. I was a little confused.
Yeah.
And I think I expressed that. But once the instructions are adopted, then we have to adapt to those instructions and work with them. And we try to make sense of them. But again, if we change them to may instead of shall, then that's clear instruction that. Then if anybody's concerned about not checking the box, then it would be clear that you don't have to check the box, but you still have to write a comment as to, the reason for the departure.
Well, let's not forget at the very top of this form, it says, yes, an inspector may check more than one box for a particular system or component. Very first one.
Yeah, which contradicts what you said inspect and not inspect, you say should.
Right.
Right, so it doesn't.
And that's why I want to change that. That's why I want to change that 100%.
May have, instead of may, it sounds like it should say may be required to.
Well, and that was the reason I brought up the point, though, those combinations of checked boxes are provided as an example, not necessarily part of rule, as far as I'm concerned, as this instruction on how to fill out the form is concerned.
There's no situation where there's no situation where it's required to check multiple boxes. It depends on the situation. And I think it's a matter for the inspector to make that determination.
So for me on this form, the biggest one for me is that should to may in that inspected and not inspected box.
Okay.
Is there any other areas that people have any concerns about that we might need to look at rewording? And you had made note that you wanted to mention this. Hang on. Go ahead.
All right, Shannon Gatewood, buckle up, I got a whole list. So reading down through this, when is a particular box appropriate? For me, I agree, everything. Personally, I check I on everything unless it's absolutely not present. That's just the way I do it. On the not inspected, that second bullet line should be present, but is not. That's where a lot of inspectors get confused. Take, for example, the garage door opener. Is it required? If it's not, is it simply an NI or an NP? What's required under should be present. So I don't know what, if I'm marking not inspected and it says should be present, but is not. Garage door opener, again, it's not, is it required to be? And then the third bullet, but cannot be fully inspected. We kind of touched on that. That's far too subjective. If that's the case, the entire report's going to be I, or is going to be INI, and that doesn't help the client at all. Backside of the water heater. Water heaters are tucked in the corner. If I'm not fully inspecting the entire backside, is that not a full inspection? So clarification on the cannot be fully inspected would be good. Next section, can an inspector check multiple boxes? Just playing a little bit of devil's advocate. Not my opinion, just I like it. I like causing a ruckus, I guess. Inspected and deficient. Why do we need to mark both? if an item is deficient, does that not signify that I inspected it and found it deficient? And then not present and not inspected, again, why? If it's not present, of course, it's not inspected. On the note, if absence of components, so where's the line? If we have a gas water heater and the flue is completely missing, is that not present? Because according to the way that's written, if absence of a component or system results in a deficiency. So the water heater flue not being present would make it not present, according to the way that's written. So
Can't inspect it if it's not there.
right, so to me, that would just be, it's deficient. I mean, there's a component missing, yeah, it's deficient. Yeah, that's it. So those are my comments on all that. Thank you.
I mean, it does say the absence of a component that's required would be a deficiency. The absence of a doorbell, not a deficiency. The absence of the flue, that's a deficiency.
I agree.
So that's,
Deficiency, but
some of that's.
not present.
Yeah, but when you say it, that would be marked,
Yes.
that would not be marked not present, because strictly inspected deficiency, the deficiency is not having the vent connector.
The deficiency to me would explain the not present is explained in the deficiency.
Now, to be fair, that does say may also need to change.
Yeah.
I think Chelsea's head's gonna explode here.
I think it's also a term of art in component and system. You're not, when you say component, you're not talking about every aspect of that component as being the component. The component is the water heater. The component is, so if there's a portion of that that's not there, you're still inspecting the component and you're marking that as a deficiency. It's not that flue is the component. The water heater, whatever the flue is part of, is the component. Same thing with the system, you
I
know?
mean, sometimes it'll go in and the stove is not there.
Yeah.
Okay, not present. It's a required item to be habitable, so it's kind of deficiency. You can't, if you just say not present, there's no deficiency in the report.
It's not required.
You just put not deficient.
You're required to have cooking appliances for habitability.
Well, not according to this, so, I mean.
Well, according to
the
you, so you can't live there without cooking
According to
appliances.
building code, not.
So a lot has
So,
been,
like a water heater missing.
mhm.
It's not installed. Plumber took it, he hadn't put a new one in. Is that a deficiency?
Not present.
Right, we can throw 20 million different examples.
So, yeah, staff just needs to know what we need to do.
I
to
say that only
correct it.
because it does say if it's not present and it's supposed to be.
And that's confusing.
I want, personally, I think as far as this form goes, I would like to see the should go to May on that inspected, not inspected, but I think as a directive for next year with the SOP is I think the not inspected really needs to be looked at in that definition and how that's done. Like I said, personally, I would like to see the not inspected or not present box just go away. Or excuse me, not inspected box go away, because I think that would solve a lot of this issue, but that is a long, tedious process. And there's goods and bads with that as well. But as far as this form is concerned, like I said, I think changing the should to may, where the cursor's at for inspected and non-inspected, would help clear it up.
I was just gonna make a comment about not knowing about the SOPs for consumers. Again, just to throw this out that people don't read the report. In the preamble, the very second thing it says is that you are guided by your SOPs. I think it even has a link, maybe a link to it to the website, and then explains generally what the SOPs do. So, you know, there is a lot of information out there for consumers to know about this. So could we do more? Sure, but I just wanted to throw that out there that it is on the very first page of the preamble of the report.
Yep.
But you can't click a link on a paper report when you get it, so that's a problem.
You are correct, sir. That is right.
And just a comment here is that the main box that needs to be checked is a deficiency. In terms of enforcement, that's what we focus on. That's how the complaints come in. Complaints come in because somebody didn't report a deficiency that was present at the time. That's the number one thing that always comes in. To check the boxes, you know, I think the members of the committee work really hard to try to regularize how to report their findings. And I think it's, you know, they were trying to be helpful to the consumer, because part of the issue is, as we talked about, the consumer is not an expert. They don't understand technical natures. So they rely on the inspector to explain to them what they found. And I think that's what they try to do with the instruction sheet. I think for the most part, the instruction sheet is helpful. We don't know how things are going to work out until after they, applied, after things come up. And once we find out, things like this, we can adjust it, which it seems like we're adjusting it today. And I think that's going to be effective. Hopefully, this will be a helpful tool. I don't think it's necessarily a hindrance, but I would just caution you with overreacting and going too far the other way.
Okay. All right, so any other modifications other than changing that particular highlighted should to may?
And the caveat as well, just updating the language to the caveat.
Okay. Anybody else have anything else to add on this? Not seeing anything online.
Does the inspector committee want to see this form again, or are you good with us staff making these changes?
I think we're good doing these changes. We can do we need a motion for that?
I would do it just for consistency.
So if we can entertain a motion to modify the instruction form as proposed.
Go ahead. I make that motion to modify this instruction form as proposed.
I second. By Mike, second by Steve. Any other discussion on this item? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Yeah. Any opposed? Hearing none. Okay. Requests for future meeting agenda items. So our next meeting will be in January sometime. I think starting the SOP review. But that can be done through the subcommittee. So anybody have any items that they want on a future agenda? Mr. Tony?
The elections, I believe, are in January. So chair, vice chair, and secretary. We've got our long-term secretary leaving here. So anybody on the committee that wants to throw their hat into the ring or whatever, just be thinking about it, because the election for the officers will be at that meeting.
Yes, indeed. Gosh, what are we gonna do without our secretary?
That's an easy goal to watch. You can't do a whole lot.
You can't leave.
Another 13 years?
Can we modify the rule? You got nothing better to do. It's fine. All right. Anybody else have any other future agenda items? All right. Discussion possible action regarding future meeting dates. Currently, we have January 16th as the proposed date for the January meeting. Day after Martin Luther King. Is it a Tuesday? Anybody have any conflicts with that date?
I don't have a conflict. That's gonna be my first
I
meeting.
was gonna say, you just.
No, listen, before the whole selection process, it's like all that stuff, I booked a vacation in Ireland. I'll do everything I can to make sure I do the Microsoft Teams meeting. So, but just in case there's some issue with the computer, maybe from a pub, but.
I'm going to Mays. I get it.
All right.
I get it. Yeah, no, that's fine.
So if something happened, I will do the team meeting.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so we're looking good for January 16th. For the April meeting, which, things can change, but currently we're looking at April 15th, which is tax day. Just in case anybody has an issue with that, but does anybody currently have any issues with April 15th being the April meeting? Seeing it up there.
It'll work on my calendar.
He's got his secretary glasses on.
I have to hand these down to the new secretary.
That's right. All right, so we're looking at Tuesday, January 16th and Monday, April 15th at 10 a.m. for those 2 weeks. With that being said, at 11:44, we will adjourn.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody online.
You signed the roster for CE credit.
Thank you, guys.
Have a great